Welcome to part 2 of this video series. In this part, we're going to show you a few things we did in the engine compartment after we got the 3.0 liter engine out, but the bulk of the video is going to be showing things that are specific that you need to do to your 3.4 liter engine for this swap. If you followed our lead and got a rebuilt engine from a quality rebuilder like Yota1 Performance, you'll need to strip down the old 3.4 liter engine and build up the new 3.4 liter engine. We decided not to show all that in this video series because we already have the other video series we did with Ray from Arizona, and we show in great detail the complete strip down of the old motor and the complete buildup of the new motor. What this video is gonna concentrate on is all the specific things you'd have to do for a 3.0 to 3.4 swap. So those are the things we're gonna concentrate on, showing you in great detail how to do to get the 3.4 liter engine ready to be installed on the second generation 4Runner. If you click on the links above, you can reference the strip down video and the build up video for the 3.4 swap we did with Ray, and you'll have all the information you need in order to properly strip down and build up your engine. If you just decided to use a used engine and not get a rebuilt engine, then what you'd want to do is tear down the upper part of your engine down to the fuel rails, so get the throttle body, the plenums off, so you can access all the electrical connectors you need to get to for your custom wiring harness, whether you bought it from a company like Off-Road Solutions or you made up your own wiring harness. Because without getting the plenums off and the throttle body out of the way, it's going to be a total fight. So you really want to do that. So without further ado, let's get started with this next installment of this series. Now that we have the engine out, we need to move some things around. Right here, I removed the ignition coil because we don't need it for the 5VZ engine. So I just unbolted that with a couple 10mm bolts and just threw it in a bag and got rid of it. The evap canister is going to go here. So we got to get this cruise control unit over to the passenger side where it normally would be on a 3.4 liter vehicle. This is gonna move over to the passenger side and the evap canister is gonna go here. There was one 10 mil here. There's another one right here. There's another one back here. We have to disconnect these electrical connectors. And then there's another connection here. Okay. The wiring is on the driver's side, and you're gonna need to extend these and bring it over to the passenger side so you can plug it in. You would just wanna clip the plugs off, give yourself plenty of room to splice in wires, and you're gonna travel these up over along the firewall with some wiring loom and bring it over to the passenger side.
All right, so for this swap, I decided to go with a battery relocation tray from ORS. It just takes some of the guesswork of fabricating your own. It's a relatively inexpensive piece for the time that it's going to save on this project. To install this, we need to first remove in this driver's side front fender well this stock airbox, and that's going to be done with two 10mm bolts. All right, so we're working on the AC compressor. The 3 liter for a 1993 to a 1995 application had the same or very similar top plate, so it mounts to the AC lines in the same spot. If you're using an application that has a 1990 to 1992, you're gonna have a different top plate that you're gonna have to switch over in order to use the existing compressor. In addition to that, these pulleys are different. The 3VZ used a V-style pulley, and the 5VZ uses these rib style pulleys. If you're gonna keep the stock system in a 93 to a 95, all you have to do is switch over these pulley systems and clutch systems that are on the AC compressor. In addition to the different ribs, the pulleys are actually gonna be, if you look at the two compressors side by side, the pulleys are gonna be in two different locations. So you're gonna have to switch that over regardless of which compressor you decide to use. But if you have your existing system and you don't want to purge the system, you can use this and just disconnect the bearing and the front plate and these pulley and clutch systems and swap them over, and that existing compressor will work. Because my system's already bled, we're gonna go ahead and unbolt these two 12mm bolts for the AC lines, and we're just gonna swap over the correct AC compressor with the correct pulley, and then I'll recharge that system at a later time. Like we were saying, we were trying not to switch these top plates, but what we noticed is even though the two top plates look very similar, the actual port in here is flared out wider on the 3.0 application. So we can't use it because that gasket for the 3.0 lines doesn't mate perfectly. So you are going to need to take off these 4 hex head bolts in order to switch the top plate to your 5VZ application. All right, so we're prepping the engine bay for the new motor. We're going to delete this old battery harness because the ORS kit that we have with the 5VZ is going to require a different harness. So we're going to delete this with the 12mm here near the fuse. And then down here, there's a clip that we're gonna undo as well. This is what it looks like. So this whole harness right here.
As part of this job, you might want to consider replacing the bearing for the AC idler pulley. This one has obvious play. It still feels pretty smooth, but it rocks quite a bit. I have a bearing that I got from Yota1 Performance. I was going to use it for my truck, but I'm a nice guy and I'm going to let Brandon have it. So we're going to show you how to replace this bearing on the AC idler pulley. This has an internal snap ring that you have to remove first, and then you could drive the bearing out this direction. So I'm going to get some Knipex snap ring pliers and I'm going to remove it. There we go. That's what that little sucker looks like. Now what I'm going to do, I learned this from Nick at Yota1 when we were doing it on my 85 4Runner. I'm going to put this to where the pulley's very well supported, but the bearing will be able to pop through. Okay, and then I'm going to get a socket that's about the same diameter as that inner race of the bearing, and I'm going to drive it out. 13, I think a 14 is going to be the right one. Let me grab a 14 over here. 14's too big. I think it's going to have to be the 13. Here goes nothing. Let's try this. Maybe a little movement. We got a little movement. Little movement is better than no movement. I'm gonna make sure that's supported even better. There it is. Yeah, and I can feel play. I don't know if the new one's gonna have that similar play, but I can grab the inner race and I can feel it rocking. So now we just gotta drive in the new one. I'm gonna clean this up with some brake cleaner and make sure it's nice and clean before putting in the new one. This is an NSK bearing. This will be linked in the video description to the part at Yota1 Performance. New bearing, old bearing. Just hold it up, make sure it's the same size, same width. There's writing on both sides. I don't think it's got to go in one direction or the other. When Nick did this at Yota1, he didn't put any lubrication, but I usually like using a little lube. I'm going to lube the outside of the bearing race with a little bit of multi-purpose grease, and I'm going to put a little bit of grease in here too. Okay, that's good enough for government work. That's what I like to say. Now we got to get this back on our bench vise. And now I can actually support this completely underneath here, give it a lot of support here. Just want to make sure it looks pretty square, and it does. I got this plastic 2x4. I'm going to put it on top and I'm going to drive it in. I've got it flush with the pulley, but now I have to drive it in further, and I have to find a socket that will fit the diameter of the outer race. You don't want to be pounding on the inner race, you'll destroy the bearing. So this is a 1/2-inch drive, 27mm. That looks like it might be good. I just don't want to get that socket stuck in there. Let me give it a few easy taps. It's going in. I think this is the right size. That's sounding solid. I think that's bottomed out. Now we're going to get our snap ring back in. If I could get the snap ring in, I've driven it in far enough. And I think that's seated. Yep. All right, let's put this back on the shaft and see if it makes a difference. It still rocks a little bit. Oh well, he's got a new bearing. The bearing does have a little bit of play, so don't let that fool you. The other one might have failed at some point, so he's got a nice new bearing, and I don't have one anymore. But no doubt, when I spin this, compared to the way the bearing felt on the old one, this one feels smoother, and the other one sounded kind of dry. It was a good decision to replace this bearing on this AC idler pulley. With this 3.0 to 3.4 swap on your second gen 4Runner, you obviously have choices of what engine you go with. You can get an engine at a wrecking yard, you can get a JDM engine. The way Brendan decided to go, which I approve of, 2 thumbs up, is he decided to get a rebuild engine from Yota1 Performance. Brand new. If this is a vehicle that you plan on keeping for a very long time, why not get a nice brand new engine for your rig? If you throw a used engine in there, you don't really know what you're getting. You don't know if that engine is going to last you 200,000 miles or it's going to last you 200 miles. And the amount of labor you do to remove the 3.0 and to get the 3.4 in there, it's quite a bit of labor. So it's entirely up to you. But if you have the money and you know you're going to keep this rig for like forever and maybe pass it down to a son or a daughter, go ahead and get yourself a nice quality rebuild engine like Yota1 Performance makes, because it's going to last you for a whole lot longer than some used engine that you have no clue really what the history is. They could say, oh yeah, it's only got 80,000 miles, but how do you know that? And the answer is you don't know. You just have to believe them. And so it's a total crapshoot. I'll be your game show girl and I'll twirl this thing around so you can see what it looks like. Okay, I'm done twirling. So with this swap, you have to put a 3.0 liter oil pan and you have to put a 3.0 liter sump that sucks the oil from the bottom of the pan into the oil pump. When it comes to the block, there's going to be some differences in the blocks. If you have a 96 to 98 and you have a 4Runner or a Tacoma, you would have your dipstick right here on the driver's side front of the oil pump. If you had a T100, the oil dipstick was always on the side here. For 96 to 98 and maybe a little bit later, because they might have been still using the same blocks for a while, maybe 99, there was a solid plug for the 4Runners and the Tacomas. You have to remove that plug so you can now put your dipstick on the side, because with this swap, you can't keep it in the front at the oil pump. You have to use the side one. Don't even try to unscrew it from the top because it's pressed in there pretty good. You want to get the oil pan off first, and then you come from the underside with a punch and you knock it out from the inside out. If you had one of the later models, 99 to 2002 for the 4Runners, or 99 to 2004 for the Tacomas, you might not have anything here. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to get a kit from Off-Road Solutions. They have a piece that clamps on here as a guide, and you drill the hole necessary for the dipstick. We don't have to do that. We were lucky because Nick at Yota1 Performance set up this engine for us to have less work. So this plug right here is a hollow plug, and this hollow plug is on your 3.0 liter engine. So what you would want to do is you'd want to take off the oil pan off your 3.0 and then come from the underside and pound this sucker out and get it into the 3.4 liter engine. So this hollow plug is a 3.0 and you can get that right from your engine that you're taking off. When it comes to this, Nick did us another solid. This is a T100 oil pump and the hole for the dipstick is sealed. It doesn't go all the way through because the T100s didn't need that hole. If you did have your dipstick tube in that spot, you have to now plug it. Dorman makes a freeze plug. They call it a steel cup expansion plug, and it's part number 555007. It's 13.7 millimeters wide and 180 thousandths tall. That's what you could use to plug this hole on the front of your oil pump so oil doesn't come shooting through there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to invert the engine and get the underside of the engine pointing up to where we can have an easier time working on getting the 3.0 oil pan connected to this 3.4 liter engine. So depending on what kind of engine stand you have a pin, you pull your pin out and then you just got to rotate this sucker. Right here, you can see that plug. So whether you're knocking out the hollow plug on your 3.0 engine so you can put it on the 3.4, or you're knocking out the solid plug on your 3.4 engine you're going to be swapping in, you have to just take a punch and you knock it out from this side outward. We got this rebuild engine from Yota1 without the oil pan on. We requested it like that because we didn't need the 3.4 liter oil pan for this job, because we need to put the 3.0 liter oil pan on this 3.4 liter engine. There was a miscommunication, and this oil baffle was left off the new engine, so we had to take it off the old engine and get this on. Now we're going to get the 3.0 oil sump on this 3.4 liter engine. We got a new gasket to seal it to the oil pump housing. We got this 3.0 liter oil sump from ORS, Off-Road Solutions. So if you were doing this, you would have to first remove the 3.4 sump. Here's the two oil sumps. This one right here in my left hand is the one for the 3.4 liter, and this is the one for the 3.0 liter. And when I put it on here, you can see that this one pretty much sticks straight down because of the way that this oil pan is formed. This 3.0 one has a different angle to it. You'll see that it kind of cants off like at maybe a 45. So this pan is shaped like this, and this is the deepest section, so it has to angle over there. So that's the difference between the two sumps, and the reason why this wouldn't work with the 3.0 pan. You have to use the oil sump for the 3.0 liter. So we have to get our two little 10 millimeter bolts in place. These double as holding the oil baffle on and the oil sump. They also call it a strainer, so oil sump, oil strainer. And then we got to get our two 10 millimeter nuts in place. That one's going to be hard to get to. Let's see, I'll get that one with a socket. I put a little black tape on the socket to hold the nut in. Threads are just a little bit sticky for some reason. Okay, now I finally got it started. I would do this with this back one because you can't get a really good shot at it, and I almost dropped that nut into the engine, which would have been a really stupid move. So do this with a little bit of black electrical tape, push the nut on there so it won't drop out, and then get that back one started because it's really hard to get your fingers in there. The torque spec for these two oil strainer nuts and the two oil strainer bolts is 66 inch-pounds. I'm just going to tighten them up equally a little bit first. Mainly worried about this one because that has a gasket. Keep on tightening them up equally. That got to the torque spec, so did that one. And then I'll get these to the torque spec. 66 inch-pounds is a really light torque spec. If you didn't have a torque wrench, then just get a little shorty ratchet like this one, where you have very little mechanical advantage, and then just go by feel and cinch them up tight. Now that we got the 3.0 oil strainer onto the 3.4 liter engine, we need to get the 3.0 liter oil pan connected to the engine. What we're going to use to seal that to the engine is the Toyota 103 black form in place gasket, FIPG. And when you're applying it, you want to put a decent sized bead, like a 2 to 3 millimeter bead, down the center. There's a little indentation on the center part of the edge of the oil pan, and then when you get to a bolt hole, you want to carry that bead on the inside of the bolt hole and then go back to the center and then travel down and then get to the next bolt hole and then go on the inside of that bolt hole and just keep on making your way all the way around the edge of the oil pan. Okay, analyze your job. Make sure that you got enough everywhere. I'm just double checking to make sure it all looks good here. So you should have two studs that help you align the oil pan. So you're going to be looking at those. Now you got to get your bolts and nuts in place. And we're not going to bother showing this. We're just going to get them in and then we'll talk about the torque spec. We've got the 17 bolts and the two nuts started. And now I'm going to just do a gradual crossing pattern, bringing up the bolts and nuts to 67 inch-pounds. I'm starting off with the center ones first, and then I'm going to work my way out. Okay, I'm going to go back around. They're starting to come up to the spec. This one hasn't hit yet. Okay, I think they're all good. I'm just now going to go around in a circle and make sure they're all at 67 inch-pounds. Okay, I went all the way around the clock. They're all torqued to 67 inch-pounds. We highly recommend that you consider replacing your fuel injectors because you'll get much better performance out of your engine if you have flow matched injectors. When it comes to buying injectors, you have choices, but we highly recommend one company, MotorWest Performance in Southern California. The injectors from MotorWest are really solid. There's never any complaints that I hear from Toyota forums or Toyota enthusiast Facebook pages. When somebody's asking for injectors, 9 times out of 10, someone says, hey, buy them from MotorWest Performance. I've gotten to know the owner, Martin Diaz. He's a solid guy. He stands behind his products. And so I can't give you a higher recommendation than MotorWest Performance. You can try to cheap out and get them from eBay, but I would not recommend you do that because there's tons of horror stories about going that route. You could buy OEM ones from Toyota, but those are super expensive. You'd spend over $1,000 on injectors. So if you're gonna follow our lead and get injectors for this swap you're doing, we highly recommend you use MotorWest Performance in SoCal. This is the custom wiring harness that you can get from Off-Road Solutions.
Off-Road Solutions!
This is a smart way to go because they do all the hard work for you and they know what they're doing. So they can build this harness to your specifications, whether you have an automatic transmission, manual transmission. You tell them what you need and they can build it to your specifications and they'll help you out. Also, on their website, they have a very good technical article, tons of information about how to do this swap. So here's the nice, beautiful wiring harness that we got from Off-Road Solutions. And we are now going to install it on the beautiful Yota1 Performance engine. You have to get oriented and figure out what is what. So a dead giveaway is when you start looking at these, well, that's injector number 5. And injector number 5 is the back cylinder on the passenger side. And then this one is injector number 6, and that's the back injector on the driver's side. So I know I should be able to lay this in like so. Get that out of the way here. Okay. It's going to look different than you had on your 3.4 liter V6 because they made this custom. It's not going to have the hard plastic wiring protector like you would have at the back of the engine at the firewall. All this stuff right here goes to the igniter and different things. All this stuff right here goes through the firewall and goes to the ECU. So this looks like the right orientation. So we should be able to now start plugging this in to this engine. We've got the Off-Road Solutions wiring harness partially connected to the engine. We've got all the injectors connected. We've got the coil packs on and the coil pack connectors connected. We've got the coolant temp sensor that sends information to the ECU in the front of the intake manifold connected. We have the NOx sensor connection connected. We have the coolant temp sensor that sends information to the gauge on your dash cluster connected. What Brendan and I have noticed is that this wiring harness from Off-Road Solutions, they put a lot of thought into it and they put a lot of work into it. They really make it to where you can't mess it up. They label each connector. Each one of these injectors is labeled which injector it goes to. Injector 5, injector 3, injector 1, and the injectors 2, 4, and 6. And then all of the coil packs are labeled. Coil pack 1, 2, and 3. Basically, there's no guesswork for you because they did all the work for you. They also use tags. Like this little tag right here says ground to engine. So this is the ground that goes to the plenum. And then all these other connections, they all have a nice little tag letting you know what they go to. I know people sometimes think that going with a pre-built harness from a company like Off-Road Solutions is a little pricey, but after I've seen the work that they put into this harness, I think this is money well spent. You can try to figure this all out yourself and build this harness and have to look at wiring diagrams till your eyes are bleeding. And if that's your thing about doing wiring and looking at wiring schematics for hours and hours and hours, well then do it yourself. But I think if you're gonna put the money into this swap, I would get a harness from Off-Road Solutions, because I am very, very impressed with the level of work they put into this. This is awesome. So thank you guys at Off-Road Solutions. You guys did an awesome job. For this job, Brendan decided to get the Off-Road Solutions headers. These sweet looking things right here. So we've got both headers attached to the heads with the same style OEM gasket, the 3-layer metal gasket. And the torque spec for these headers is 30 foot-pounds if you were going to be removing your stock exhaust manifolds to put these ORS headers on. Along with the ORS headers, we have an ORS crossover pipe. It's going to go on like this. Originally, on a 3.4 liter vehicle, the exhaust runs down the passenger side, but on a second gen 4Runner, the exhaust runs down the driver's side. So you need a custom crossover pipe. ORS provides a crossover pipe that you could also hook up to your stock exhaust manifolds if you wanted to use the ORS crossover pipe, but keep your existing OEM exhaust manifolds. Let me show you what the passenger side ones look like. They're shaped a little bit different. We were going to get this crossover pipe on. With this Harbor Freight stand, there's a little bit of a obstruction with the engine mount plate, so we can't get this on yet. So we're going to have to actually remove the engine from this Harbor Freight stand to where we can make the crossover pipe connection. We're at the point where we're working on the front of the motor. We just got the water neck on, and for the piece of the wiring harness that goes down and connects up to the crank position sensor and to the oil pressure sending unit, we decided to do a modification using the existing clamp that you would have on your 5VZ engine. There's a wiring harness clamp that attaches to the top nut for the water neck, and then there's this little plastic piece that attaches to the original harness, and we decided to reuse both those pieces. We took the little plastic piece with the plastic clip and we taped it to the ORS harness, and now we can plug it right in here and it's a nice stretch. So you might want to do that too. Use the bracket that attaches to the water neck and then use the little plastic clip that attaches to the original wiring harness. Another part of the Off-Road Solution wiring harness is the starter wire harness. You have the starter power, you have the, I think it's called the igniter that sends the signal to start the starter. What we did is we zip tied it to the old harness, the original Toyota harness, to get the length. Mainly because right underneath where the crankshaft pulley goes, we want to know where we could use a couple clamps to attach it to the M6 holes on the bottom of the block. So to basically get a roundabout idea of where we're going to need to clamp it. And then this is going to be the negative and positive terminals that go to the battery. And this one we'll have to figure out. We'll have to look up the instructions. But we suggest you do this. If you get the whole ORS wiring kit and you get the starter wire harness too, do this so you know where to clamp it on the block. So here's what Brendan and I came up with for the starter wire harness. We used the original starter wire bracket and we took some 5/8 electrical clamps and we put a couple M6 bolts with the washer under the head of the bolt, and then we put another M6 washer and M6 nylon lock nut on the back, and it kind of mimics how the original harness would slip in and connect up to these 2 points. The way we mounted the starter wire harness didn't end up working out once we got the engine inside the engine compartment and we got the crank pulley on. We noticed that the crank pulley was going to be able to rub against the wiring harness, so we disconnected those clamps that attached the wiring harness to the starter wire bracket, and we just left it hanging for now. And Brendan said he's going to work on a better way to connect the wiring harness to that starter wire bracket, and hopefully by the end of part 4 we're going to be able to share that with you. This one right here is a ground strap that's going to go over here, I think right to that bolt hole right there. This bolt hole is the spot for the ground for the starter wire harness. This block was painted, so I want a good ground, so I'm going to sand this off. Any area you're going to use for a ground, you don't want it painted because you're not going to get a good ground that way. Okay, that's nice and clean. And then we're just going to bolt it in. We're using this little shorty 14 millimeter we had. We don't know if this was the actual bolt that was used for it, but it's going to work fine. No torque value for this. Just get it snug and call it good. Okay, that's good and tight. Now we're going to show you installing the dipstick. We're actually installing a dipstick from a T100. It looks like this. Where this mounts up is in the spot where this alternator insulator bracket or generator bracket. Two 10 millimeter bolts, I'm going to remove those. When you order this, it comes with a new O-ring. I'm just going to lubricate it with a little bit of motor oil. So I'm going to slide the O-ring into the dipstick adapter right there on the block. And then you just rotate it in and get your 10 millimeter bolt started. Easy peasy. If I didn't say it already, all the part numbers for these parts that we're using for this job are going to be listed in the video description. So don't worry. I'm sure there's a torque spec for those little 10 millimeter bolts, but I don't care. I'm just going to get them snugged up to my torque elbow. Remember, they're a small fastener, so that's why I'm using a little shorty ratchet. Less mechanical advantage. All right, that's done. I guess we'll get our dipstick in too. Where's the dipstick? All right, nice brand new dipstick. Ooh, tight grommet. Ugh. That sucker ain't going nowhere. It's a little hard to pull out, but no way that's gonna rattle out. Okay, we've got the T100 dipstick attached to this engine. We learned with this swap, you want to use the 3.0 liter engine brackets and 3.0 liter engine mounts. You have to use the 3.0 liter on the 5VZ motor. This dipstick that we already installed, we had to uninstall it because it fits right through the center of this driver's side motor mount bracket. So you slide it in between here, and then you feed it down in there and plug it in. And then you could just secure it again to the alternator bracket. When it comes to the oil pressure sensor on the driver's side of the motor, right by the oil filter, you need to swap the 3.0 oil pressure sending unit for the 5VZ one, because this actually will give you the oil pressure on your gauge. This won't do it. This is just a sensor, but this one will actually read the oil pressure and send it to your gauge cluster on your dash. So you have to swap them. When you're running the headers from Off-Road Solutions, your oil cooler hose is going to come pretty darn close to it. What they provide is heat shielding. It wraps around into Velcros, and so you want to protect this part that comes really close to the header so you don't burn up your oil cooler hose. So we don't have it connected to the water pump yet, so we're going to pull this out and we're going to wrap it around. Brendan and I decided that we want the heat shielding pretty much ending right at the fitting on the oil cooler, because we figured this is where the most heat's going to be. As it travels further forward, the headers kind of go away from the oil cooler. We think this is appropriate, having it back as far as can be close to the oil cooler nipple. Here's the stock return hose for the fuel system on a 5VZ engine. It connects to the bottom of the fuel pressure regulator, and then it wraps around, and this little metal harness attaches to the lower plenum right here. And then this hose would go over to your driver's side fender and connect up to the metal hardline that runs back to the tank. With this application, putting it in a second generation 4Runner, we have to run a new line because the return line is on the passenger side of the engine. Same with this high pressure send line. We bought some 1/4 inch fuel line, and we have this like a long section, and we have it pre-connected because this is going to be hard to get to when the engine's inside the vehicle. So we just have a section way longer than we need. And then when we get the engine in, we're going to cut it to size and connect it to the hard line on the passenger side of the engine compartment. As part of this job, if you have a manual transmission, we highly recommend you spend the money, get a new clutch, flywheel, pressure plate, pilot bearing, and throwout bearing, because why not? You got the engine out and this is the opportune time to do it. Brendan decided to go with a heavy duty clutch because he plans on supercharging at some point in the future. So we're installing a Marlin crawler, heavy duty clutch, pressure plate, and we're using a flywheel for the 3.4 liter. You could technically use the 3.0 liter flywheel, but the 3.4 is just a bigger and badder and better flywheel. So we recommend going with the 3.4. One thing to note, the throwout bearing has to be for the 3.0 because you're using that transmission. So you have to use the throwout bearing for the 3.0 liter, not the 3.4. If you have any questions about this, ORS has a really good technical article and instructions. And if you're still confused after reading that library of material, you can call them and they'll help you out. They're nice guys. We're gonna get this all put back together. We're not gonna show it because we show it in two different videos, on my 22 RE swap on my 85 4Runner, and then we also show this process on a 3rd gen 4Runner when we help this guy Dan from Kirkwood.
Dan the Man Doomer.
With the engine off the stand, now we can get the crossover pipe connected. The Harbor Freight stand was interfering with us getting it connected, so that's why we didn't connect it on the stand. This is the type of connection for headers. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but there's no gasket. It's just a metal to metal contact and it makes a seal. This is common with headers, according to the experts. ORS also sells a crossover pipe that works with the stock exhaust manifolds. It would have a flange like this, the triangular shaped flange that you would put an exhaust donut in between the crossover pipe and each side of the exhaust manifold, and then you would tighten up the 14 millimeter nuts and suck them together. So with this application, we're gonna fit the crossover pipe onto the headers, and then we gotta grab the supplied hardware. So you put a washer under the head of the bolt, and then you get your flange nut started on the back. So with the supplied hardware, these nuts are a lock type of nut. So as soon as you get to the end, they're kind of shaped oblong a little bit, and it locks on, and they do that so these won't come loose. So these type of nuts are pretty standard with exhaust setups. They're a locking type so they won't back off easily. You have to use some muscle to back them off. When it comes to tightening these flanges together, the verbiage they used is they don't need excessive torque. So I took that to mean don't go crazy with it, because if you go crazy with it, if you use enough force, you can draw these flanges together if you really went crazy with a 1/2-inch drive ratchet. So I just got a little shorty right now with the 14 millimeter socket, and I'm holding the other side with the box end. We're just gonna go by feel. We snugged up the bolts and nuts that hold the crossover pipe to the headers. We decided to put some heat shielding. This isn't the right size for this application. It was actually like 1.25 inches. We combined two sections together to get it to be able to wrap over it fairly well. This one flexible coupler is not big enough to fit around, but we're mainly worried about heat from the exhaust transferring to the heads, because it is known that the cylinders that could be having a head gasket problem normally are the ones in the rear because of the transfer of the heat from the exhaust crossover pipe to the head. So this is just a little bit of extra insurance. Guys use exhaust tape, so before you put the crossover pipe, you could just wrap the exhaust tape over all the sections, and then it's going to be shielding the heat from the exhaust that's going to transfer to the head. All right, this is the end of part 2. Join us in part 3, where we show you how to get this beautiful Yota1 rebuilt engine with some custom Off-Road Solutions parts on it into Brendan's 2nd generation 4Runner.